with ICCRC, but Section 91.2 of IRPA gives us a list of people who can do that. So, and I'll read it. 91.2 says, a person does not contravene subsection 1 if they are a lawyer who is a member in good standing of a law society or a province, or a notary who is a member in good standing of the Chambre des Notaires du Québec. B, any other member in good standing of a law society of a province or the Chambre des Notaires du Québec, including a paralegal. C, a member in good standing of a body designated under subsection 5. And this is where, when we look at 91.2c, it refers to subsection 5, so I'll read it right away. Subsection 5 says, the minister may, by regulation, designate a body whose members in good standing may represent or advise a person for a consideration or offer to do so in connection with the submission of an expression of interest under subsection 10.13 or a proceeding or application under this act. In one word, 91.2c of IRPA and 91.5 of IRPA refer to immigration consultants. When we talk about a designated body, we're talking about here about ICCRC, about the Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council. So basically what 91 is telling us is that you are not violating 91.1, meaning that you can provide legal representation and you can provide immigration advice to a client and receive money for doing so if you are, one, a lawyer in good standing of a Canadian law society, or a Quebec notary. That's 91.2a. So if you're a lawyer in Canada, if you're a duly called lawyer in the law society in Canada, and you're a Quebec notary, you're fine. You can represent an immigration client, and you can provide advice to an immigration client, and you can receive fees. You can get paid to do so. Now, if we took a B, any other member in good standing of a law society of a province or the Chambre des Notaires du Québec, including a paralegal. In some provinces, paralegals, and I think Ontario is one of them, some paralegals are part of the law society. So what 91.2b is telling us is that if you are a member of a law society and you're not a lawyer, you're a paralegal, for instance, that's fine. You can provide representation, you can provide advice to an immigration client, and you can get consideration, you can get paid to do so. All right, no problem there. And finally, at 91.2c, the Act is telling us that if you are a duly registered member of a body designated by the government, by the minister, that's fine. And here, as we mentioned, we refer, in our case of immigration consultants, to ICCRC. So because of 91.2c, if you are a duly registered immigration consultant with ICCRC, you can, as mentioned at 91.1, you can provide representation and you can provide advice, immigration advice, to clients, and you can legally get paid for your services. Very important to understand. So this is really the cornerstone of our ethical obligations. The first question from an ethical standpoint, do I have the right to represent an immigration client? Do I have the right to provide advice to an immigration client? And if so, can I get paid for my services? So you have to fall within one of the categories we just looked at 91.2a, b, and c. Now, there are some exceptions or some narrow situations where the Act provides other people that are allowed to provide representation and provide advice to immigration clients. Let's take a look at Section 91.3 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And I'll read. A student at law does not contravene subsection 1 of section 91 by offering or providing representation or advice to a person if, and there's a condition there, if the student at law is acting under the supervision of a person mentioned in paragraph 2A who is representing or advising the person. In summary, if you are a student at law, you can represent and you can provide legal advice to an immigration client and receive consideration to do so under the condition that you are acting under the supervision of a lawyer or a Quebec notary. So it's an extension of the right to lawyers to provide advice or immigration representation. So they give that extension to students at law. It's, in my experience, not a situation you see a lot in the practice where an immigration lawyer will rarely allow a student to represent a client, maybe to provide legal advice. You see that a little bit more often, or to relay instructions from the lawyer, but it's not a very common situation. But nevertheless, keep it in mind, this is an extension of the right of lawyers to provide advice and to provide representation for consideration. Let's take a look at section 91.4. An entity, including a person acting on its behalf that offers or provides services to assist persons in connection with the submission of an expression of interest or an application under this act, including for a permanent or temporary resident visa, travel documents, or work or study permits, does not contravene subsection 1 if it is acting in accordance with an agreement or arrangement between that entity and Her Majesty in right of Canada that authorizes it to provide those services. So we're giving a little, with section 91.4, we're giving a little bit of latitude to the government, to the minister, to authorize certain organizations to help people with their immigration needs. So we can think about some NGOs, for instance, that would be allowed by the government to help immigration clients or immigrants, potential prospective immigrants, to file an application. So what 91.4 is telling us is that if this organization or this person has a specific arrangement, a specific agreement with the government to allow them to represent and provide advice to immigrants, that is fine. But as you can see, it's a pretty narrow exception, again, where you can probably talk about, especially in refugee cases, for instance, where the government will allow certain NGOs or certain religious organizations, for instance, to represent or to provide advice to clients. But again, these are pretty narrow exceptions. I think the general concept, which we see much more often, is to provide representation and to provide legal advice. And if you're getting paid to do so, you need to be either a lawyer, a Canadian lawyer, or an immigration consultant registered with ICCRC. The rest of section 91 is pretty straightforward. One subsection I'd like to read with you is subsection 7.1. When we talk about the province of Quebec, remember, ICCRC, you can represent and provide advice to immigration clients for all provinces except the province of Quebec. So what section 91, subsection 7.1 is telling us is the following. For greater certainty, an act respecting immigration to Quebec applies to, among other persons, every person who, in Quebec, represents or advises a person for consideration or offer to do so in connection with a proceeding or application under this act, and A, is authorized to do so under regulations made under paragraph 7b, or B, is a member of a body designated under subsection 5. So, in one word, if you're a member of ICCRC, body designated under subsection 5, it's not enough to represent a client under a Quebec immigration program. you also have to be registered with the Quebec government in compliance with the Act respecting immigration to Quebec. So a lot of words basically to say, if you will represent clients under a Quebec immigration program, you either have to be a Quebec lawyer, a lawyer called to the Barreau du Québec, to the Law Society of Quebec, or an immigration consultant registered with the Quebec government, and they have various conditions to be registered. Okay. Subsection 9 of Section 91, Section 91.9 talks about the penalties, which is quite important. So that will make you, sometimes when we talk about dollar signs, we tend to pay more attention to our ethical obligations, right? So let me read it for you. So 91.9 says, every person who contravenes subsection 1, which we read earlier, commits an offense and is liable, A, on conviction on indictment, to a fine of not more than $200,000 or to imprisonment for a term of not more than 2 years or to both, or B, on summary conviction to a fine of not more than $40,000 or to imprisonment for a term of not more than 6 months or to both. So as you can see, pretty harsh penalties attached to our ethical obligations to represent immigration clients, and you have to make sure that before you do so, you have the right to provide advice or to present clients under Section 91. And these harsh penalties have been, I think, the result of an ongoing problem we have in this industry or in this area of practice of ghost consultants. A lot of people, mostly in foreign countries, but in Canada as well, are providing legal advice or are providing immigration advice or are representing clients without the right to do so. So the government over the last decade or so, or actually, since Mangat in 2001, has tried various ways to try to take care of that very important problem. Because, if you're a ghost consultant, if you're a consultant or someone who does not have the right to provide advice, there's no way to know you'll provide the correct advice, and, protection of the public should be paramount. So the government and the various designated bodies